The F-22 Raptor tore through the Pacific sky at a blistering Mach 1.8, its pilot's hands remarkably steady on the controls despite the insurmountable odds stacked against her. This was Captain Deborah Wilson, and she hadn't just flown the world's most advanced fighter jet. She had taken it. Not for glory, but for a singular burning vindication. For years, she had been systematically denied the very combat training that now, ironically, made her the sole pilot capable of intercepting 4 enemy aircraft, poised to annihilate an American naval fleet. The very woman deemed too emotional for combat was now on the precipice of proving that deep-seated institutional prejudice had nearly robbed the military of its most potent weapon. She was about to engage in the most decisive aerial battle of the 21st century, facing adversaries who were utterly oblivious to the fact they were about to encounter a force with absolutely nothing left to lose. 18 hours earlier, the pre-dawn stillness at Nellis Air Force Base was brutally shattered by the piercing shriek of an alarm. Captain Deborah Wilson jolted awake in her cramped quarters, her body already responding. Muscle memory guiding her hands towards her flight suit even before her mind fully registered the blaring klaxon. It could only mean one thing: a real-world emergency activation. Her digital clock, a beacon of angry red numbers, glowed 4:47 a.m. as she swung her legs out of her narrow bunk, rolling seamlessly into the controlled chaos that was about to define the next day, and perhaps the rest of her life. All personnel to stations. This is not a drill. The base's public address system crackled, its disembodied voice laden with an unusual urgency. Deborah, with practiced, almost dismissive efficiency, yanked on her boots. All around her, the transport squadron's pilot quarters erupted into a flurry of activity. 24 aviators stirring, most of them preparing for what they assumed was just another elaborate training exercise disguised as an emergency alert. Deborah had endured this precise routine hundreds of times over the past 3 years. Ever since her final, definitive rejection from fighter pilot training had shunted her into the 437th Airlift Wing, the bitter irony had gnawed at her. She was certified to pilot a colossal C-17 Globemaster, capable of hauling 170,000 pounds of cargo through active combat zones. Yet the Air Force had inexplicably deemed her unsuitable for the single-seat fighter she had dreamed of commanding since she was a child. The briefing room, usually a somber space, now buzzed with an undercurrent of nervous energy as pilots shuffled in, clutching coffee cups like lifelines, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of sleep. At the front, Colonel Vince Murphy stood rigid, his usually composed, weathered face etched with a gravity Deborah had never witnessed before. Murphy, a rare and steadfast ally, had been her most vocal advocate during the arduous fighter training appeals process. A man who had fought a long, losing battle against an institutional resistance as unyielding and impenetrable as carved stone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a developing situation in the North Pacific," Murphy began, his voice, now sharp and commanding, cutting through the scattered chatter like a honed blade. Approximately 2 hours ago, our long-range radar detected multiple unidentified aircraft approaching the USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group. Initial attempts at communication have been entirely unsuccessful. Deborah felt an immediate surge, her pulse quickening in her veins. The USS Gerald Ford, the Navy's newest, most formidable supercarrier, a veritable floating city housing over 5,000 souls, sailors, and Marines. If hostile aircraft were truly targeting that strike group, this was no mere training exercise. The threat appears to be a coordinated formation of advanced fighter aircraft. Origin unknown, but presumed hostile based on their flight profile and complete failure to respond to international frequency calls, Murphy continued, his voice grim. Naval aviation assets in the area are severely limited due to scheduled maintenance rotations. We're looking at a potential David and Goliath scenario here, gentlemen. Lieutenant Cheryl Green, Deborah's closest friend and fellow transport pilot, leaned in, her whisper barely audible. Please tell me we're not flying cargo runs into a combat zone? Murphy's next words answered that question with devastating clarity. The 65th Aggressor Squadron was scrambled an hour ago, but mechanical failures have grounded all but one of their F-22s. A collective gasp rippled through the room. We have exactly one Raptor available and the pilot qualified to fly it. He paused, consulting his tablet, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Is currently dealing with a family emergency in Colorado. A profound silence descended upon the room as the devastating implications sank in. One fighter against multiple hostiles was pure suicide, even with the F-22's legendary technological advantages. Deborah's mind raced, already sifting through tactical scenarios, her dormant fighter pilot training kicking in despite years of monotonous transport missions. "Sir," Captain Lance Mitchell spoke up from the front row, his voice carrying the customary cocky confidence that had made him the squadron's unofficial leader. "What about calling in Air National Guard units? Vegas has F-16s, and Mach Air Reserve Base is only 45 minutes out." Murphy cut him off, his voice sharp. "The hostiles will be in striking range of the carrier group in 30 minutes. We're out of options." Deborah's hand rose before she could even stop herself. "Colonel, request permission to speak." Murphy's eyes, sharp and assessing, found hers across the crowded room. She saw something flicker in their depths, a desperate hope mixed with profound resignation. "Go ahead, Wilson." "Sir, I completed Phase 1 and Phase 2 of fighter training before my reassignment," she began, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering of her heart. "I'm current on F-22 systems for my test pilot applications, and I've logged simulator time on the Raptor's combat systems as recently as last month. I volunteer for the mission." The room erupted in a cacophony of murmurs and astonished exclamations. Mitchell twisted in his seat to stare at her, his face contorted in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me, Wilson. You're a cargo pilot. This isn't about moving boxes from point A to point B." "I'm a pilot who was denied advanced training due to institutional bias, not lack of ability," Deborah shot back, her voice rising above the chatter, crackling with a fierce conviction. "My score in air-to-air combat simulations ranked in the top 5% of my class before I was transferred to transport duty." Murphy raised a hand, demanding silence. "Wilson, what you're suggesting is—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't instantly end his career. "Irregular." "Sir, with all due respect, the entire situation is irregular," Deborah countered, her gaze unwavering. "We have American lives at stake and one aircraft capable of defending them. Whether I'm technically qualified according to the bureaucracy is less important than whether I can do the job." Commander Wade Kelly, the squadron's senior training officer, slowly rose. Kelly was a legend, a no-nonsense instructor who had trained half the fighter pilots currently serving in the Pacific Theater. His opinion carried weight that could make or break careers. "Murphy, I hate to say it, but Wilson's got a point. I've seen her flight evaluations, and I've watched her handle that C-17 in conditions that would rattle experienced fighter jocks. She's got the instincts and the training. Kelly paused, his gaze fixing directly on Deborah. Question is whether she's got the stones to take on multiple hostiles in single combat. I do, sir. Deborah's response was immediate and unwavering. Murphy remained quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all seemed to lead to either a court-martial or utter catastrophe. Finally, he looked up from his tablet, the expression on his face that of a man about to jump off a very high cliff. Wilson, you're not officially qualified for F-22 operations. I can't authorize this mission. Deborah's heart sank, but Murphy wasn't finished. However, if a pilot were to take emergency action to protect American forces under imminent threat, that would fall under the Combat Initiative Clause of Engagement Protocol. He met her eyes with a look that conveyed everything he couldn't officially articulate. The F-22 in Hangar 7 is fueled and armed for the training mission that was scrubbed due to the alert. The room was dead silent as everyone processed the audacious implication of Murphy's words. He was, in essence, giving Deborah unofficial permission to steal a fighter jet and conduct an unauthorized combat mission. If she succeeded, she would be a hero. If she failed, Murphy would likely face a court-martial for enabling her. "Sir, I understand," Deborah said quietly, her voice barely a whisper but laced with fierce determination. "Good. Everyone else, you're dismissed to your regular transport duties. Wilson, you have 30 minutes to file whatever flight plan you deem appropriate." As the room emptied, Cheryl Green lingered behind, her face pale with worry. "Deborah, this is insane. You're talking about taking on multiple fighters alone. Even if you're the best pilot in the world, the odds are that a lot of sailors die if someone doesn't try." Deborah was already gathering her gear, her mind rapidly shifting into mission planning mode. Besides, they're not expecting someone crazy enough to steal an F-22. That might be the only advantage I need. Cheryl grabbed her arm, her grip tight. "What if you're wrong? What if this gets you killed for nothing?" Deborah paused at the door, looking back at her friend with a sad, knowing smile. "Then at least I'll die doing what I was meant to do instead of living with the regret of what I was never allowed to try." She walked out into the cool Nevada dawn, leaving behind the perceived safety of transport operations and stepping irrevocably toward a destiny that would either vindicate every dream she'd ever harbored or destroy her in the most spectacular way imaginable. The F-22. The hangar was dimly lit when she arrived. The F-22 Raptor, a silent, sleeping predator under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sergeant Rolfo Espinosa was already there, conducting his methodical morning inspection, his experienced hands moving with the precision of a man who had kept pilots alive for 23 years. "Captain Wilson," he stated, without looking up from the engine intake he was examining. "Funny seeing you here this early. Thought you transport folks didn't start flying until the sun came up." "Special circumstances, Sergeant." Deborah ran her hand along the fighter's wing, feeling the smooth, cool composite skin that made the aircraft nearly invisible to radar. "How is she looking?" Espinosa straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag as he studied her face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "She's perfect. Fueled, armed, and ready to dance. Question is, what kind of dancing you planning to do?" "The kind that might get us both in trouble if anyone asks too many questions." The veteran sergeant nodded slowly, a knowing glint in his gaze. "Captain, I've been around long enough to know when something big is happening. Whatever you're planning, you watch yourself up there. This bird's got more teeth than anything else in the sky. But she can't fly herself home. I'll bring her back, Sergeant. That's a promise." As Deborah began her pre-flight inspection, her hands moved through the familiar routine, checking control surfaces, verifying weapon systems, testing the multi-million-dollar avionics that made the F-22 the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. Every switch and gauge brought back a flood of memories from her abbreviated fighter training, the vivid dreams that had been systematically crushed by men who clung to the outdated belief that women belonged in support roles, not combat positions. Today, she was going to prove them all spectacularly wrong. The F-22's engines spun up with a rising, guttural whine that Deborah felt deep in her bones, the twin Pratt and Whitney turbofans generating enough thrust to lift a building. She adjusted her helmet's heads-up display as the aircraft's sophisticated computers sprang online, painting her visor with a dazzling array of flight data that would have been pure science fiction just a generation ago. The Raptor was responding to her inputs like a thoroughbred eager to run, every system operating at peak efficiency, despite her unauthorized presence in the cockpit. "Raptor 77, you're not on today's flight schedule. Please confirm your mission authorization." Tower control crackled through her headset as she taxied toward the runway. Deborah's finger hovered over the radio transmit button for a heartbeat. Once she answered, there would be no hiding what she was about to do. "Tower, this is emergency sort under combat initiative protocol. Request immediate takeoff clearance." A tense pause. Then a different voice. Older and more authoritative. 77. This is Major Frank Olson, Tower Supervisor. Captain Wilson, I need you to return to the hangar immediately. You are not authorized for F-22 operations. Major, with respect, I have American lives at stake in the Pacific. I'm proceeding with emergency authorization under Article 15 of engagement protocols. The words sounded more confident than she felt, but sometimes confidence was all that separated success from disaster. "Wilson, if you take off in that aircraft, you'll be in violation of approximately 12 different regulations. This is a direct order to shut down and return to the hangar." Deborah pushed the throttles forward. The massive engines responded with a guttural surge of power that pressed her back into the ejection seat. "Sorry, Major. Can't hear you over the engine noise. Must be a radio malfunction." She switched to an emergency frequency and accelerated down the runway, feeling the familiar, exhilarating rush of takeoff as the F-22 lifted off the desert floor and climbed toward the pale morning sky. Behind her, Nellis Air Force Base fell away like a collection of toy buildings, and ahead lay 600 miles of open ocean, where American sailors were counting on someone, anyone, to save their lives. The flight to the Pacific took a mere 43 minutes at maximum military power, the F-22's supercruise capability allowing it to break the sound barrier without the telltale afterburners. Deborah used the time to meticulously study the intelligence briefings downloaded to her aircraft's computer, painting a grim picture of the threat that made her stomach clench with professional concern. 4 unidentified aircraft, designation unknown, but displaying flight characteristics consistent with advanced foreign fighters. Their radar signature suggested stealth capability, meaning she was dealing with technology comparable to her own. The hostiles had maintained absolute radio silence despite repeated attempts at communication, suggesting either a catastrophic equipment failure or, far more likely, hostile intent. Neither option was encouraging. Ghost 77, this is USS Gerald Ford Air Control. The Navy's voice was crisp and professional, yet Deborah could discern the underlying tension. We have you on scope, bearing 270 at Angels 35. Confirm your identity and mission parameters. Ford Control. Ghost 77 is an F-22 out of Nellis, responding to your request for air support. What's your current tactical situation? 77, we have 4 bogies at your 11 o'clock, range 60 miles and closing. They've ignored all attempts at communication and are maintaining an attack profile toward our position. Rules of engagement are weapons free if they enter our defensive perimeter. Deborah adjusted her course, her radar beginning to paint the distant contacts as faint blips on her display. 60 miles was close enough to engage with modern air-to-air missiles, but far enough away that she had time to attempt one last diplomatic solution before the shooting started. Ford Control. Be advised that I'm the only friendly fighter in the area. If this goes kinetic, you'll want to make sure your people stay clear of the airspace above you. A pause. Then the Navy controller's voice, tinged with disbelief. 77? Did you say you're the only fighter? We were expecting a full squadron response. Long story, Ford Control. Just get ready for a fireworks show. Deborah clicked off her comms, a grim determination setting in. The 4 hostile aircraft were now closer, their radar signatures growing stronger. No time for pleasantries. Time to go to work. Control. Let's just say I'm highly motivated to succeed. Deborah switched to the international emergency frequency, broadcasting in the clear to the approaching aircraft. Unknown aircraft approaching U.S. naval forces. This is Captain Deborah Wilson, United States Air Force. You are entering restricted airspace and are directed to alter course immediately or face defensive action. Silence. She tried again, in Spanish, then Russian, getting the same non-response. Whatever these pilots intended, they weren't interested in talking their way out of it. At 40 miles, her radar warning receiver began chirping insistently. The bogies had locked onto her aircraft with their targeting systems. A clear indication of hostile intent in the complex rules of aerial engagement. Being locked up by an unknown aircraft was considered an act of aggression that justified defensive measures. Ford Control, be advised the bogies have me locked up. I'm classifying them as hostile and engaging under rules of engagement. Copy 77. You are cleared hot. Good hunting. Deborah armed her weapons systems, feeling the familiar heavy weight of responsibility that came with the authority to take human life. The F-22 carried 6 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders, enough firepower to engage multiple targets if she was smart and very, very lucky. At 30 miles, the first missile launch detection alarm screamed in her headset. One of the hostiles had fired, sending a radar-guided missile streaking toward her position at 3 times the speed of sound. The engagement had officially begun. Deborah threw the F-22 into a violent evasive maneuver, deploying chaff and flares while diving toward the deck to break the missile's lock. The weapon screamed past her aircraft, close enough that she could see its exhaust trail, a chilling reminder that in aerial combat, the margin between victory and death was measured in milliseconds and split-second decisions. Time to see what all that training was worth, she muttered, pulling out of her dive and climbing back toward the fight. The 4 hostile aircraft had spread into a textbook tactical formation designed to overwhelm a single defender, too high, too low, with overlapping fields of fire that would make it nearly impossible for a conventional fighter to engage without being destroyed. But the F-22 wasn't a conventional fighter, and Deborah Wilson wasn't planning to fight this battle conventionally. She selected her first AMRAAM and locked onto the lead hostile, waiting until the optimal firing parameters appeared on her heads-up display. The missile dropped away from her aircraft with a whisper of release and accelerated toward its target, its active radar seeker painting the enemy fighter with invisible energy that would guide the weapon to impact. The hostile pilot was good, immediately recognizing the threat and deploying countermeasures while diving sharply toward the ocean surface. But modern missiles were designed to defeat such tactics, and the AMRAAM stayed locked onto its target through the evasive maneuvers. The explosion was visible from 20 miles away, a brief orange flower blooming against the blue sky before the debris tumbled toward the Pacific. 1 down, 3 to go. The remaining hostiles reacted with professional competence, immediately converging on Deborah's position while launching a coordinated missile attack. 3 weapons were inbound, their combined targeting making it impossible to defeat them all with conventional evasive maneuvers. Instead, Deborah did something that would have gotten her court-martialed in peacetime and might very well get her killed in combat. She turned directly toward the incoming missiles and accelerated, using the F-22's incredible thrust-to-weight ratio to climb almost vertically, while deploying every countermeasure in her arsenal. 2 missiles lost lock and detonated harmlessly in the chaff cloud she left behind. The third stayed true, forcing her to roll inverted and dive back toward the ocean in a maneuver that pulled so many G's, her vision grayed at the edges. The missile exploded 50 feet below her aircraft, close enough that shrapnel peppered her wing surfaces and sent warning lights dancing across her instrument panel. She was still flying, but the F-22 had taken damage that would affect its performance in the prolonged engagement she was now facing. Forward control, splash 1 bandit. 3 remaining hostiles are engaging. Be advised, my aircraft has sustained minor damage but remains mission capable. Copy 77. Outstanding work. Can you handle 3 more? Deborah looked at her fuel gauge and weapon status, doing rapid mental calculations. She had 5 missiles remaining, and enough fuel for perhaps 15 more minutes of high-intensity maneuvering against 3 experienced pilots in advanced aircraft. Those weren't encouraging odds. I'll handle them or die trying, forward control. The second hostile was diving toward her from above, trying to get into gun range where his aircraft's cannon could tear apart the damaged F-22. Deborah waited until he committed to his attack run, then pulled into a climbing turn that brought her nose around to face him head-on. Both pilots fired simultaneously, their missiles passing each other in opposite directions like deadly ships in the night. Deborah's AMRAAM found its target first, sending the hostile fighter tumbling toward the ocean in pieces. But the enemy missile was still tracking, forcing her to execute another punishing evasive maneuver that sent fresh warning lights illuminating across her cockpit. Hydraulic pressure dropping, engine temperature rising, fuel leak detected. The F-22 was slowly dying around her, each hit degrading its performance and reducing her chances of survival. But she was still in the fight, and the odds had improved to 2 against 1. The remaining 2 hostiles, having witnessed the efficiency with which Deborah had dispatched their wingmen, changed tactics. They split apart and began a patient, stalking approach, one drawing her attention while the other maneuvered for a killing shot. It was a classic fighter pilot tactic, and it was working. Deborah found herself caught between the 2 aircraft, unable to engage one without exposing herself to the other. Her fuel was running perilously low. Her aircraft was damaged, and she was facing two fresh opponents who were coordinating their attacks with professional skill. For the first time since the engagement began, she wondered if she had finally bitten off more than she could chew. Then she remembered something Colonel Murphy had taught her during one of their unofficial mentoring sessions, back when he was still desperately trying to get her into fighter training through official channels. "Sometimes, Wilson," he'd said, "the only way to win an impossible fight is to change the rules." Deborah smiled grimly, a dangerous glint in her eyes, and began implementing a plan that was either brilliantly unconventional or completely suicidal. In aerial combat, sometimes there wasn't much difference between the two. Deborah cut her engines and went into a controlled free fall, the F-22 dropping like a stone toward the Pacific Ocean, while the two remaining hostiles overshot her position. The maneuver was insane by conventional standards. Deliberately giving up altitude and energy in aerial combat was typically suicide. But conventional wisdom hadn't anticipated someone desperate enough to treat a $70 million fighter aircraft like a lawn dart. Her radar warning receiver fell silent as the enemy pilots, confused by her sudden disappearance from their scopes, lost their targeting solutions. Deborah counted to 3, then fired her engines back to full military power and pulled into a climbing turn that would have torn the wings off a lesser aircraft. The G-forces crushed her deep into the ejection seat as she climbed back toward the fight, her vision tunneling to a narrow cone despite the pressure suit squeezing her legs to keep blood flowing to her brain. The first hostile was still searching for her when she emerged from below like an avenging angel, her remaining AMRAAM missiles locked and ready. She fired 2 weapons in rapid succession, one at each target, then immediately dove back toward the deck to avoid the inevitable counterattack. Both missiles found their marks. The explosions lit up the morning sky in twin fireballs that sent debris raining into the Pacific. Deborah pulled out of her dive at wave-top level, her aircraft's engines screaming as she climbed back toward cruising altitude. The radar display that had been cluttered with hostile contacts just moments before was now clean, showing only the friendly symbols of the naval fleet she had protected. "Forward control! Ghost 77! All hostile aircraft are down! Repeat, all bandits are splashed. The threat to your position has been eliminated." The carrier's response came through with barely controlled excitement. 7-7. Outstanding work. We're showing all contacts neutralized. What's your status? Deborah looked at her instrument panel, counting the warning lights that had accumulated during the intense engagement. Hydraulic pressure was marginal. Fuel was critically low, and her left engine was running hot, too. Hot enough to cook dinner. The F-22 had taken more punishment than any aircraft should be able to survive, but it was still flying. "Forward control, I've got battle damage and low fuel. Request permission to land aboard your vessel for emergency repairs." A pause. 77. We'd love to accommodate you, but the F-22 isn't carrier capable. Our deck isn't equipped for your aircraft type. Deborah had known that before she even asked, but desperation made people try impossible things. The F-22 was designed for conventional runways, not the controlled crash that passed for carrier landings. Even if the USS Gerald Ford's deck could handle her aircraft's weight, she lacked the tailhook and reinforced landing gear necessary for arrested landings. "Copy that, Forward Control. I'll head for the nearest friendly airfield." She turned east toward the California coast, calculating fuel consumption against distance and coming up with numbers that didn't inspire confidence. The nearest military airfield was Lemoore Naval Air Station, roughly 200 miles away. At current fuel burn rates, she might make it if nothing else went wrong. Of course, things had been going wrong all day. 10 minutes into her flight toward shore, the left engine temperature spiked into the red zone. Deborah shut it down immediately, leaving her flying on single-engine power with fuel consumption that made her previous calculations optimistic at best. The F-22 could fly on one engine, but not efficiently, and not for long. She began descending to conserve fuel, watching the California coastline creep closer with agonizing slowness. At 50 feet above the waves, she was low enough to see individual whitecaps and taste salt spray through her aircraft's air conditioning system. If the remaining engine quit now, she'd have about 15 seconds to execute a perfect water landing or become another statistic. Lemoore Tower. This is Ghost 77 declaring an emergency. I'm an F-22 inbound from the Pacific with battle damage, single-engine operation, and critical fuel state. Request immediate clearance for straight-in approach. 77 Lemoore Tower. We copy your emergency. You're cleared to land any runway. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Be advised, we're not equipped for F-22 operations, but we'll do everything we can to assist. The coastline passed beneath her wings like a salvation, followed by the familiar patchwork of California farmland and suburban development. Lemoore appeared on the horizon as a collection of runways and hangars that looked more beautiful than any sight she'd ever seen. Her remaining engine coughed once, twice, then settled back into its steady roar. The fuel gauge was reading empty, but military aircraft were designed with reserves that might buy her a few more precious minutes. Tower. 77 is on final approach. Single engine, no hydraulics, and running on fumes. This is going to be interesting. Copy 77. Emergency crews are in position. Bring her home safe. The approach was steeper than standard, her damaged aircraft dropping toward the runway like a controlled meteorite. Deborah extended the landing gear and held her breath as the wheels locked into position. Despite the failed hydraulic system, the F-22's computer was working overtime to keep the aircraft stable, its fly-by-wire controls compensating for damage that should have made controlled flight impossible. Touchdown was harder than she would have preferred, the aircraft bouncing once before, settling onto the concrete with a shriek of tires and the roar of reverse thrust. She deployed the drag chute and stood on the brakes, bringing the wounded fighter to a stop with less than 1,000 feet of runway remaining. Fire trucks surrounded the aircraft before she could even shut down the engine, their crews ready to deal with fuel leaks or any other emergency that might arise. Deborah sat in the cockpit for a moment, letting the reality of survival sink in. She had stolen a fighter jet, engaged 4 hostile aircraft in single combat, and lived to tell about it. Now came the hard part. Explaining herself to the authorities who were undoubtedly already en route. The canopy hissed open, and she climbed out onto the wing to find herself face to face with a Navy commander whose expression mixed professional concern with obvious curiosity. Captain Wilson, I presume. Commander Sarah Bradford, Lemoore Operations. That was some flying out there. We monitored the engagement on long-range radar. Thank you, ma'am. Is there somewhere we can secure this aircraft? I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of people asking questions about today. Already taken care of. We've got a hangar prepared. And the base commander is standing by to debrief you. Bradford paused, studying Deborah's face. Captain, I have to ask, did you really steal that F-22 to conduct an unauthorized combat mission? Yes, ma'am, I did. And you engaged 4 hostile aircraft alone? Yes, ma'am. Bradford shook her head in amazement. Either you're the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both. Right now, I'm just grateful to be alive. The debriefing lasted 4 hours and involved more senior officers than Deborah had seen in one room since her commissioning ceremony. Navy, Air Force, and civilian personnel took turns asking questions about everything from her tactical decisions to her motivation for stealing military property. Through it all, she maintained that her actions were justified by the undeniable threat to American lives and the utter lack of alternatives. Admiral Kurt Anderson arrived by helicopter from San Diego, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he listened to her account of the engagement. Anderson had a reputation as a straight shooter who valued results over regulations, but even he seemed stunned by the sheer audacity of what she had accomplished. "Captain Wilson," he said, when the formal questioning was complete, "what you did today was either an act of extraordinary heroism or an egregious violation of military law. Possibly both. I understand. Sir, I accept full responsibility for my actions." Deborah's voice was firm. "The question now is what happens next. You've exposed a significant gap in our defensive capabilities while simultaneously demonstrating exceptional combat skills," Anderson observed, his gaze sharp. "There are people in Washington who want to court-martial you, and others who want to pin a medal on you." Deborah straightened in her chair. "Sir, I did what I thought was necessary to protect American lives. If that violates regulations, then perhaps the regulations themselves need to be examined." Anderson almost smiled, a rare softening of his stern features. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that got you into this situation in the first place. It's also exactly the kind of attitude we need more of in our pilot ranks." He stood up, signaling the end of the debriefing. "Captain, you're confined to base pending a full investigation. Don't interpret that as punishment. It's for your own protection as much as anything else. This story is going to hit the media like a bomb, and there are going to be a lot of people wanting to talk to you." As if summoned by his words, a young lieutenant appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Admiral, sir, we've got a problem. Somehow the media got wind of the story. There are news trucks surrounding the base, and they're demanding access to Captain Wilson." Anderson sighed deeply. How the hell did they find out so fast? "Unknown, sir. But CNN is reporting that a female pilot stole an F-22 to engage enemy aircraft over the Pacific. They're calling it the most dramatic act of military heroism since World War II. Deborah felt her stomach sink. Media attention was the last thing she needed while facing potential court-martial proceedings. The military preferred to handle its problems quietly, away from public scrutiny that might influence official decisions. "Sir," she said quietly, "I never wanted this to become a public spectacle." "Too late for that, Captain. Like it or not, you're about to become the most famous pilot in America. The question is whether that works for you or against you." Anderson moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. "Wilson, off the record. What you did today took guts that most people can't imagine. You saved lives and proved a point that needed proving. But you also kicked over a very large hornet's nest. The people who denied you fighter training in the first place aren't going to appreciate being made to look like fools." After he left, Deborah sat alone in the empty briefing room, listening to the distant sound of helicopters and news crews gathering outside the base perimeter. Through the window, she could see protesters already beginning to assemble, some supporting her actions, others condemning them. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from an obscure transport pilot to the center of a national controversy about women in combat, military discrimination, and the sanctity of the chain of command. The fight in the sky had been dangerous, but straightforward. The battle she was about to face on the ground would be far more complex, and perhaps even more challenging, and potentially more destructive to everything she had worked to achieve. The call came at 06:30 hours, jerking Deborah from the first real sleep she'd managed in 36 hours. Her temporary quarters at Lemoore were Spartan, but comfortable, a stark contrast to the media circus brewing outside the base gates. The voice on the secure line belonged to Colonel Gladys Hayes, a military prosecutor whose reputation for thoroughness had earned her both respect and fear throughout the Air Force legal community. Captain Wilson, this is Colonel Hayes from the Judge Advocate General's office. I'm calling to inform you that formal charges are being prepared in connection with your unauthorized use of military equipment. You'll need legal representation. Deborah sat up in the narrow bunk, her mind immediately shifting from sleep-fogged confusion to sharp alertness. What specific charges, Colonel? Theft of government property, violation of flight safety regulations, unauthorized combat engagement, and disobedience of direct orders. That's just the preliminary list. Depending on how the investigation develops, additional charges may be filed. The words hit like physical blows. Each charge carried potential prison time that could total decades behind bars. Deborah had known this moment would come, but hearing the formal accusation still felt like a punch to the gut. I understand, Colonel. When will I be formally charged? Within 72 hours. Captain, I'm required to inform you that anything you say can be used against you in court-martial proceedings. I strongly advise you to obtain counsel before making any statements about your actions. After the call ended, Deborah stared at the institutional green walls of her quarters, trying to process the legal machinery grinding into motion around her. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of protesters chanting, their voices mixing support and condemnation in equal measure. The woman who had been invisible to the military hierarchy just days ago was now the center of national attention. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. She opened the door to find Dr. Jacqueline Wilson, her older sister, standing in the hallway with dark circles under her eyes and worry etched across her familiar features. "Jackie!" Deborah's voice cracked slightly. "How did you get on base?" "Admiral Anderson authorized family visits, medical privilege, and all that." Jacqueline stepped into the room and immediately wrapped her younger sister in a fierce hug. "Deborah, what the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking that people were going to die if I didn't do something." Deborah pulled back to look at her sister's face. "Jackie, you should see the intelligence reports. Those aircraft weren't lost tourists. They were hostile forces targeting American ships." "I believe you, but stealing a fighter jet? There had to be other options." Deborah moved to the small window, peering through the blinds at the circus of media trucks and protesters gathered beyond the fence line. Name: 1. The Navy had no available fighters. The Air Force had one damaged F-22 and no qualified pilot. By the time reinforcements could have been scrambled from other bases, those sailors would have been fish food. Jacqueline sat heavily on the room's single chair, her medical training warring with sisterly concern. The charges they're talking about, Deborah. You could go to prison for 20 years or more. I know. Deborah's voice was quieter now, the stark reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. But those sailors are alive. Their families get to see them come home. That's worth something. It's worth a lot. But is it worth your entire future? Before Deborah could answer, another knock echoed through the small room. This time it was Lieutenant Cheryl Green, looking tired but determined, carrying a thick folder of papers. Sorry to interrupt family time, but I thought you should see these. Cheryl set the folder on the narrow desk and began spreading out documents. Media coverage from the last 24 hours. It's intense. The headlines: I told a story of national division that Deborah hadn't anticipated. Hero or criminal? Female pilots' unauthorized mission saves lives competed with military discipline breakdown. Rogue pilot violates chain of command. Cable news shows had featured heated debates between military experts, arguing about everything from gender integration to the proper response to emergency situations. There's more, Cheryl said, pulling out a printed email. This came through official channels an hour ago. It's from the family of Captain Cole Rivera, one of the pilots aboard the Gerald Ford. His wife wanted you to know that he's alive because of what you did. Deborah read the message twice, her eyes burning with unexpected tears. Rivera was a husband and father of 3 who should have been in the fighter aircraft that should have responded to the threat. Instead, he was safe aboard the carrier, eating breakfast and planning his next shore leave. There are dozens more like it, Cheryl continued. Families of sailors and Marines aboard those ships. They don't care about regulations or proper procedures. They just know their loved ones are coming home. Jacqueline picked up one of the newspaper clippings, her expression thoughtful. Deborah, this isn't just about you anymore. Look at these opinion pieces. People are using your story to talk about discrimination in the military, women in combat roles, institutional resistance to change. You've become a symbol. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to fly fighters. Sometimes we don't get to choose what we become. Jacqueline's voice carried the weight of professional experience dealing with impossible situations. The question is, what do you do with the platform you've been given? Another knock interrupted their conversation, this one more authoritative. Colonel Vince Murphy stepped into the crowded room, his expression mixing pride with deep concern. Ladies, I need to speak with Captain Wilson privately. Jacqueline and Cheryl gathered their materials and left, but not before Jackie squeezed Deborah's hand and whispered, Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Murphy waited until they were alone before speaking. Deborah, we need to talk about what comes next. The preliminary investigation is complete, and the findings are complicated. Complicated how, sir? The good news is that intelligence analysis confirms your assessment of the threat. Those aircraft were definitely hostile, armed with advanced air-to-air missiles, and approaching the Gerald Ford with clear intent to engage. Your decision to intercept them saved American lives. Deborah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. At least her tactical judgment had been thoroughly vindicated. And the bad news? The bad news is that General Kenneth Davis is pushing hard for maximum charges. He sees your actions as a direct challenge to military authority and wants to make an example of you. The name sent a chill through Deborah's chest. General Davis had been the final authority who denied her fighter pilot application 3 years ago, citing vague concerns about unit cohesion and the physical demands of combat flying. His opposition to women in combat roles was well known throughout the Air Force, though he was always careful to couch his objections in terms of military effectiveness rather than personal bias. Sir, General Davis has had it in for me since my first application. This isn't about military discipline. It's personal. I know that, and you know that, but proving it is another matter entirely. Murphy moved to the window, watching the growing crowd outside the base perimeter. Davis has allies in Congress and the Pentagon. He's arguing that if we don't prosecute you to the fullest extent, it will encourage other pilots to ignore orders whenever they disagree with their superiors. What does Admiral Anderson think? Anderson's caught in the middle. He recognizes the value of what you accomplished, but he also has to maintain good relations with Air Force leadership. Politics, Deborah. It's all about politics now. Murphy turned back to face her, his expression grave. There's something else you need to know. The investigation turned up some interesting information about how those hostile aircraft knew exactly when and where to find the Gerald Ford. Intelligence thinks there may have been a security breach, someone feeding information to foreign agents. The implications were staggering. If hostile forces had inside information about American naval movements, the threat was far larger than a single engagement over the Pacific. Deborah's unauthorized mission might have inadvertently exposed a massive intelligence failure that reached to the highest levels of the defense establishment. Sir, are you saying there's a mole? I'm saying the investigation is expanding far beyond your actions, and that's both good and bad for you. Good because it validates your decision to engage. Bad because it means this case is going to attract attention from people who prefer to operate in the shadows. A sharp rap on the door interrupted them. Murphy opened it to reveal a tall woman in civilian clothes whose bearing screamed federal agent, despite her business attire. Colonel Murphy, I'm Special Agent Jennifer Morrison, FBI. I need to speak with Captain Wilson about the events of yesterday. Murphy stepped aside reluctantly. Agent Morrison, Captain Wilson is facing military charges. Any questioning should go through her legal counsel. This isn't about military discipline, Colonel. This is about national security. Captain Wilson may have stumbled into something much larger than an unauthorized combat mission. Deborah looked between Murphy and the FBI agent, recognizing that her simple decision to protect American lives had inadvertently uncovered threads of a conspiracy that reached far beyond a single act of military disobedience. The stolen F-22 and the aerial combat had been just the beginning of a story that threatened to reshape how America defended itself against enemies, both foreign and domestic. Agent Morrison, I'll answer your questions, but I want Colonel Murphy present, and I want everything on the record. Morrison nodded approvingly. Captain, I think you're going to find that the people you saved yesterday are just the tip of the iceberg. Your unauthorized mission may have prevented something far worse than a single attack on a naval vessel. As they settled in for what promised to be a very long conversation, Deborah realized that her personal fight for the right to fly fighters had evolved into something much more significant. A battle for the soul of military justice and the protection of American lives against threats that went far deeper than foreign aircraft over the Pacific Ocean. Agent Morrison spread classified photographs across the conference table like a dealer shuffling deadly cards. Each image showed satellite surveillance of military installations, detailed shipping schedules, and precise fleet movements, information that should have been known only to the highest levels of American defense planning. The level of detail was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Captain Wilson, these images were recovered from the wreckage of the aircraft you shot down. Morrison's voice was clinical, though Deborah could detect the barely controlled anger in her eyes. Someone with extraordinary access to classified information has been feeding intelligence to hostile forces for at least 18 months. Your engagement yesterday interrupted what we believe was the opening move in a much larger operation. Deborah studied the photographs, her pilot's eye automatically analyzing the tactical implications. The hostile forces hadn't just known where to find the Gerald Ford. They had possessed detailed intelligence about the carrier's defensive capabilities, escort vessels, and operational patterns. It was the kind of information that took months, if not years, to gather and analyze. Agent Morrison, who has access to this level of classified material? Colonel Murphy inquired, his voice tight. That's the problem, Colonel. Morrison leaned forward, her expression grim. We're looking at approximately 200 personnel across Navy, Air Force, and Defense Department agencies. Anyone from ship captains to Pentagon staff officers could potentially have provided this information. The scope of the potential betrayal was staggering. Deborah realized that her unauthorized mission had done more than save lives. It had exposed a security breach that threatened the very foundation of American military operations. There's more, Morrison continued, producing another set of documents. Communications intercepts suggest that the attack on the Gerald Ford was meant to be a demonstration, a proof of concept, showing that American naval forces could be targeted and destroyed with precision. The real target appears to be something much larger, such as the Pacific Fleet exercises scheduled for next month? Deborah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Exactly. 73 ships, including 4 carrier battle groups, conducting joint operations across 600 miles of ocean. If hostile forces have the kind of intelligence we're seeing here, they could coordinate a devastating attack that would cripple American naval power in the Pacific for years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Deborah's single-handed defense of one carrier had potentially saved not just the lives of 5,000 sailors, but the entire strategic balance of power in the Pacific Ocean. Agent Morrison, Murphy said slowly, his voice tinged with awe. Are you suggesting that Captain Wilson's actions yesterday prevented a Pearl Harbor-scale disaster? I'm suggesting that her actions gave us advanced warning of a threat we didn't know existed. Without the intelligence recovered from those aircraft wrecks, we would have sailed into those exercises blind, completely unaware that our enemies knew exactly where we would be and when. A sharp knock interrupted their discussion. A young Navy ensign entered with a sealed message that he handed directly to Morrison. She read it quickly, her expression darkening with each line. Gentlemen, Captain Wilson, we have a problem. General Davis has accelerated the court-martial proceedings. Captain Wilson is to be transferred to Nellis Air Force Base tomorrow morning for formal charges and confinement pending trial. Deborah felt her stomach drop. Confinement meant isolation from the investigation, separation from the evidence that might vindicate her actions, and placement under the direct authority of the man who had opposed her career from the beginning. Can you prevent the transfer? Murphy asked. Not without revealing classified aspects of this investigation. And frankly, we need Captain Wilson's continued cooperation to identify the source of the intelligence leak. If she's locked up at Nellis under Davis's authority, that becomes much more difficult. Morrison gathered her photographs and documents, securing them in a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before answering. During your time at various bases, have you noticed anyone asking unusual questions about fleet movements, exercise schedules, or classified operational details? Deborah closed her eyes, mentally reviewing 3 years of transport missions, briefings, and casual conversations with fellow officers. The military was a gossipy environment where information often flowed freely among trusted personnel, making it difficult to identify truly suspicious inquiries among normal professional curiosity. Agent Morrison, there's something that might be relevant. During my last assignment at Edwards, there was a civilian contractor who seemed unusually interested in F-22 capabilities and deployment schedules. Dr. Marcus Webb from Advanced Aerospace Solutions. He was working on some kind of systems integration project. Morrison's pen stopped moving across her notepad. Webb? We've had our eye on him for other reasons. Can you describe his specific questions? He wanted to know about response times, fuel capacity, weapons loadouts. Said it was for compatibility studies, but the questions seemed more tactical than technical. I reported it to security, but nothing came of it. That report might have gotten buried if Webb had friends in the right places. Morrison made additional notes, her expression sharpening. Captain, this could be significant. Webb's company has contracts with multiple defense agencies, giving him access to exactly the kind of information we're seeing in these intelligence packages. The pieces of a larger conspiracy were beginning to fit together, painting a picture of systematic betrayal that reached far beyond a single security breach. Deborah realized that her fight for recognition as a combat pilot had stumbled into something that threatened the very foundations of national defense. Agent Morrison, what happens now? She asked. Now we race against time. Morrison's voice was grim. The Pacific Fleet exercises begin in 3 weeks. If we can't identify and neutralize the intelligence source by then, we'll have to either cancel the exercises, which would signal weakness to our enemies, or proceed knowing that we're sailing into a trap. Murphy stood up, his career military bearing evident in every line of his posture. Agent Morrison, I'll do whatever I can to delay Captain Wilson's transfer, but I can't stop it indefinitely. General Davis has too much influence, and he's determined to make an example of her. Understood, Colonel. But we need her testimony about Webb and anyone else who might have been asking suspicious questions. Her cooperation could be the key to preventing a military disaster. After Morrison left, Deborah and Murphy sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the magnitude of what they had learned. The simple act of protecting American lives had evolved into a complex investigation that could reshape military security procedures for decades. Sir, I have to ask, Deborah said, breaking the silence. Do you think General Davis knows about the intelligence leak? Murphy's gaze met hers, a complicated mixture of suspicion and weariness in his eyes. I don't know, Deborah, but I wouldn't put it past him to be either complicit or dangerously negligent. This whole situation, his personal vendetta against you, it's too convenient. We'll find out. Together. Answer was carefully measured. I think General Davis is a career officer who puts institutional loyalty above individual justice, whether he knows about the specific breach or not. He's going to prioritize maintaining military discipline, over-accommodating an investigation that makes the Air Force look incompetent, even if it means compromising national security. Deborah, you're assuming that Davis sees the bigger picture. From his perspective, you're a rogue pilot who violated direct orders and endangered military authority. Everything else is secondary to maintaining the chain of command that he spent 40 years serving. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Lieutenant Gustavo Peña stepped into the room, his young face bright with an excitement that seemed oddly out of place given the gravity of their discussion. "Captain Wilson, sir. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted you to know that the story about yesterday's mission is spreading through the pilot community like wildfire. I've gotten calls from academy classmates, flight instructors, even retired pilots I haven't talked to in years. Everyone wants to know if it's true that you really took on 4 hostiles single-handed." Deborah managed a tired smile. "It's true, Lieutenant. Not my smartest decision, but it worked out. Ma'am, you don't understand. This isn't just about one engagement. You've become a symbol for every pilot who's ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't the right fit, weren't what the military needed. Female pilots, minority pilots, anyone who's faced discrimination, they're all talking about Captain Deborah Wilson, who proved that ability matters more than politics." The weight of unwanted symbolism settled over Deborah like a heavy coat. She had never aspired to be a representative for social justice or military reform. She had simply wanted to fly fighters and serve her country. But events had conspired to make her the focal point for debates that reached far beyond her personal ambitions. "Lieutenant, I appreciate the support, but I'm facing serious charges. Court-martial proceedings, potential prison time. This might not end the way people hope. With respect, ma'am, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you showed it could be done. You proved that the barriers aren't about capability. They're about prejudice. Even if they court-martial you, they can't undo what you accomplished." After Peña left, Murphy turned to Deborah with an expression that mixed pride with deep concern. "He's right, you know. Regardless of what happens in court, you've changed the conversation about women in combat roles. The question is whether you're prepared for the responsibility that comes with that kind of influence." "Sir, I'm not sure I have a choice anymore." "No, I don't think you do. The moment you climbed into that F-22, you started something that's bigger than any individual career or court-martial. The only question now is whether you're going to let other people define Zaborbase Masofor Tao. Alewa Wad Z's Suavantamandosam. Something becomes, or whether you're going to take control of your own narrative." Deborah looked out the window at the protesters still gathered beyond the base perimeter, their signs and chants representing competing visions of what her actions meant for military justice and national defense. Tomorrow, she would be transferred to face charges that could destroy her life. But tonight, she had decisions to make about how to use the platform that had been thrust upon her. The woman who had stolen a fighter jet to protect American lives was about to discover that the most difficult battles weren't fought in the sky. They were fought in courtrooms, congressional hearings, and the relentless court of public opinion, where the rules of engagement were far more complex than anything she had learned in flight school. The transport helicopter thundered across the Nevada desert at first light, carrying Deborah toward what felt like her own execution. Through the aircraft's small windows, she watched the familiar landscape of Edwards Air Force Base disappear behind them, replaced by the harsh beauty of the Mojave that stretched endlessly toward her destination. Seated across from her, two Air Force security specialists maintained professional silence while studying classified orders that would deliver her into General Kenneth Davis's custody. The flight gave her time to think about the intense conversation she'd had with Agent Morrison just before departure. The FBI investigation had accelerated overnight, with additional evidence pointing directly toward Dr. Marcus Webb as the source of the intelligence leak. Webb's company had contracts that provided access to naval scheduling systems, Air Force deployment data, and classified research on radar-defeating technologies. More disturbing was the discovery that Webb had been asking specific questions about Deborah's own training records and combat capabilities. "Why would he care about my background?" she had asked Morrison during their hurried breakfast meeting. "Because you were an anomaly in the system," Morrison had replied, her voice grave. "A highly qualified pilot denied fighter training for reasons that didn't match your performance evaluations. Someone planning a major operation would want to account for personnel who might not react according to institutional expectations." The implication was chilling. Webb and his co-conspirators had apparently identified Deborah as a potential wild card who might take unauthorized action in a crisis. Her reputation for challenging unfair policies had made her both a security risk and an inadvertent threat to their plans. Now, as the helicopter descended toward Nellis Air Force Base, she wondered if walking into General Davis's custody was exactly what Webb's people wanted. Isolated under military confinement, she would be unable to assist the FBI investigation or provide testimony that might expose the full scope of the conspiracy. The landing was smooth, but stepping onto the tarmac felt like entering enemy territory. General Davis was waiting personally, surrounded by an honor guard that seemed more like a prisoner escort than a welcoming committee. His presence at such a routine transfer suggested that this was about more than military discipline. It was personal. "Captain Wilson?" Davis's voice carried the weight of 4 decades in uniform and the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "You've caused quite a stir with your unauthorized adventure. General, I did what I believed was necessary to protect American lives." "You did what you believed gave you the right to ignore direct orders and military authority. There's a difference, Captain, and you're about to learn what that difference costs." The base commander's office was decorated with photographs spanning Davis's entire career. From his days as a young lieutenant flying F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam to his current position overseeing pilot training across the western United States, each image represented a military culture built on hierarchy, discipline, and unquestioning obedience to superior authority. "Captain Wilson, you stand accused of theft of government property valued at $73 million, violation of flight safety regulations, unauthorized engagement with hostile forces, and willful disobedience of direct orders." Davis read from a formal charge sheet with the precision of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar proceedings. How do you plead to these charges?" "Not guilty, sir." "Not guilty." Davis set down the paperwork and fixed her with a stare that had intimidated junior officers for 4 decades. "Captain, I watched the gun camera footage from your stolen aircraft. I've read the intelligence reports about those hostile fighters. I know exactly what you did out there. And I know that you saved American lives." The admission caught Deborah off guard. She had expected denial, minimization, or accusations of reckless endangerment. Davis's acknowledgement of her success seemed to undermine his own prosecution. "But, sir, if you know that my actions were justified, Justified is not the same as authorized, Captain. Military effectiveness depends on discipline, not individual heroism. If every pilot decided to ignore orders whenever they disagreed with their superiors, we wouldn't have a military. We'd have armed chaos. Davis moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where F-22s and F-16s sat ready for training missions. I've been flying military aircraft for 42 years, Captain. I've seen combat in 3 wars and trained thousands of pilots. In all that time, I've learned that the most dangerous person in any military unit is the individual who thinks they know better than the system. Sir, what if the system is wrong? Then you work within the system to change it. You don't steal fighter jets and conduct unauthorized combat missions. You follow proper channels, accept official decisions, and trust that your superiors have access to information you don't possess. The philosophical divide between them was unbridgeable. Davis represented a military culture that valued predictability and hierarchy above all else. Deborah embodied a newer generation that questioned authority when it conflicted with mission effectiveness and moral responsibility. General, the proper channels failed. I applied for fighter training 3 times through official procedures. Each application was denied despite superior performance evaluations and test scores. When American lives were at stake, those same proper channels left us with 1 damaged aircraft and no qualified pilot. Your applications were denied because military units require cohesion and trust. Davis countered, his voice flat. Fighter squadrons operate as integrated teams where personal relationships and unit dynamics can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Introducing personnel who might disrupt those relationships creates risks that outweigh individual capabilities. The words hit Deborah like physical blows. Davis was essentially arguing that her gender made her inherently disruptive to military effectiveness, regardless of her skills or qualifications. It was the kind of institutional prejudice that had driven her to take unauthorized action in the first place. Sir, with respect, that argument has been used to exclude qualified people from military service for decades. Women, minorities, anyone who didn't fit traditional expectations. Each time actual combat experience proved that capability mattered more than demographics. And each time those changes were implemented gradually with proper planning and institutional support, not through individual acts of defiance that undermine military authority. A knock on the door interrupted their philosophical debate. Major Ruby Garcia entered with a folder of documents and an expression that mixed professional duty with obvious discomfort. Garcia had been one of the first women to complete fighter pilot training, but had subsequently accepted transfer to administrative duties after facing persistent resistance from male colleagues. General, the preliminary court-martial scheduling is complete. Captain Wilson's hearing is set for next week, pending completion of the investigation. What investigation? Davis's tone suggested irritation at any delay in proceedings. Sir, the FBI has requested additional time to interview Captain Wilson about potential security breaches related to the hostile aircraft engagement. Agent Morrison's office sent formal notification this morning. Davis's jaw tightened visibly. The FBI investigation was clearly complicating his plans for a quick court-martial that would make an example of Deborah while minimizing public attention. Major Garcia, inform Agent Morrison that Captain Wilson is confined pending military justice proceedings. Any FBI interviews will be conducted through proper military channels with Air Force legal representation present. Sir, Agent Morrison indicated that this involves national security matters that take precedence over military discipline procedures. The tension in the room was palpable as Davis weighed his institutional authority against federal law enforcement jurisdiction. Finally, he turned back to Deborah with an expression that mixed frustration with grudging acceptance. Captain Wilson, it appears your unauthorized adventure has attracted attention from agencies beyond military authority. That may delay your court-martial, but it won't change the fundamental facts of your case. Sir, what if the investigation proves that my actions were necessary to prevent a larger attack on American forces? Then you'll be a criminal who accidentally did something useful. Military discipline doesn't operate on results-based evaluation, Captain. It operates on adherence to lawful orders and proper authority. You violated both regardless of the outcome. After Garcia left, Davis moved to his desk and began reviewing what appeared to be Deborah's complete military record. The file was thick enough to represent 3 years of detailed performance evaluations, training records, and career progression documentation. Captain, I want you to understand something. This isn't personal animosity toward you as an individual. You're an exceptional pilot with skills that would be valuable in any fighter squadron, but you represent a challenge to military culture that goes beyond individual qualifications. How so, sir? You've demonstrated that institutional decisions can be circumvented by individual action. You've shown that unauthorized initiative can produce better results than following proper procedures. Those lessons, if allowed to spread through the military, would fundamentally undermine the discipline that makes our forces effective. The honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. Davis was acknowledging that her success threatened the very foundations of military hierarchy, making her dangerous regardless of her intentions or capabilities. General, are you saying that military effectiveness requires suppressing individual initiative? I'm saying that military effectiveness requires balancing individual initiative with institutional control. Your actions yesterday shifted that balance in ways that could have far-reaching consequences for military discipline and effectiveness. A secure telephone rang on Davis's desk, interrupting their conversation. His side of the call was brief and professional, but Deborah could see his expression darkening with each exchange. Captain, it appears that Agent Morrison's investigation has uncovered additional evidence that requires your immediate cooperation. You're being transferred to FBI custody for protective questioning. Protective questioning, sir? The investigation has identified specific threats against personnel involved in yesterday's engagement. Until those threats are neutralized, you'll be held in federal protective custody rather than military confinement. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The criminal charges that were supposed to punish Deborah for unauthorized action were being delayed by an investigation that might prove her actions prevented a national security disaster. The woman who had defied military authority to protect American lives was now being protected by federal authority from retaliation by the very enemy she had engaged. As they waited for FBI agents to arrive, Davis looked at Deborah with something approaching respect mixed with professional frustration. Captain, regardless of how this investigation develops, your military career is effectively over. The Air Force cannot retain personnel who demonstrate such fundamental disregard for authority and procedure. I hope your moment of heroism was worth the price you'll pay for it. Deborah met his gaze steadily. Sir, if the price of following proper procedures is American lives, then yes, it was worth it. The FBI safe house was a nondescript ranch home in suburban Las Vegas, its modest appearance hiding sophisticated surveillance equipment and security measures that would have impressed a paranoid dictator. Agent Morrison had explained during the drive from Nellis that 3 separate intelligence agencies had identified credible threats against personnel involved in disrupting the Pacific operation, making protective custody more than just bureaucratic caution. Deborah sat in the living room, studying files that Morrison had cleared for her review. Each document revealed another layer of the conspiracy she had accidentally exposed. Dr. Marcus Webb's operation was far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected, involving defense contractors across multiple countries and intelligence networks that reached into the highest levels of several allied governments. "Captain, I need you to look at these communication intercepts." Morrison spread printouts across the coffee table, each page marked with classification stamps that suggested careers could be destroyed just for possessing them. "These are encrypted messages between Webb and his contacts, decoded by NSA cryptographers working around the clock." The messages were chilling in their casual discussion of military casualties and strategic disruption. Webb's network had been planning coordinated attacks on American naval forces that would have killed thousands of sailors while demonstrating the vulnerability of conventional military power to asymmetric threats. "Agent Morrison, this suggests they were planning to attack multiple carrier groups simultaneously. The Gerald Ford engagement was just the beginning." "Exactly. Your unauthorized intervention didn't just save one ship, it disrupted a timeline that would have culminated in the largest naval disaster since Pearl Harbor. Webb's people are scrambling to salvage their operation while dealing with the intelligence failure your mission represents." A secure telephone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the afternoon quiet. Morrison answered with the terse professionalism of someone accustomed to receiving bad news at inconvenient times. "Morrison here?" "Yes, I understand. When are you certain?" Her expression darkened with each response. "Understood. We'll implement enhanced security immediately." After ending the call, she turned to Deborah with an expression that mixed professional concern with personal worry. "Captain, Webb's organization has identified your location despite our security measures. We're moving you to a different facility immediately." "How is that possible? I thought this place was secure." "It was secure against conventional threats. But Webb has access to intelligence resources that we apparently underestimated. Satellite surveillance, electronic intercepts, possibly even human sources within federal agencies." The scope of the conspiracy was expanding beyond anything Deborah had imagined when she first climbed into that stolen F-22. What had seemed like a simple decision to protect American lives had revealed a network of betrayal that threatened the very foundations of national security. "Agent Morrison, are you saying that Webb has people inside the FBI?" "I'm saying that Webb's operation demonstrates capabilities that suggest significant intelligence support. Whether that support comes from within American agencies or from foreign services working with American traitors is something we're still determining." Morrison began gathering the classified documents while speaking rapidly into a radio that connected her to backup teams positioned around the safe house. The evacuation was planned and executed with military precision, but Deborah could see the tension in Morrison's movements as she coordinated their departure. The drive to the secondary location took them through downtown Las Vegas, past casinos and tourist attractions that seemed surreal given the gravity of their situation. Deborah found herself wondering if any of the tourists photographing neon signs and street performers realized they were witnessing the movement of personnel involved in preventing a national security disaster. "Captain, while we're relocating, I need to prepare you for what comes next." Morrison navigated traffic while maintaining constant radio contact with surveillance teams. Congressional intelligence committees have demanded immediate briefings about the Pacific incident. You'll be testifying before closed sessions of both House and Senate oversight bodies. What kind of questions should I expect? Everything from your specific tactical decisions during the engagement to your knowledge of the intelligence breach that made the attack possible.